What up? It's Ian, the Fit Medic here, and today we're doing an episode on the COVID-19 vaccine series. Roll the intro. I just wanted to come on here today and make a video because I've found that there's been a significant amount of misinformation and unfortunate fear associated with that in regard to the two COVID vaccines that have emergency approval via the FDA in the United States. If you follow my Instagram, shameless plug, you've probably already seen a post on this topic already. I just wanted to create a video for it just because it's sometimes an easier format than reading an entire lengthy post of words. So let's get into it. The objectives of this video are to present the actual data that is out on both of these vaccines, dispel some of the myths associated with those vaccines, and talk about personally why I made the decision to get the vaccine. So currently there are two COVID-19 vaccines that are out and have emergency approval via the FDA. That's Moderna and Pfizer. They're just two different organizations, two different companies that have produced similar vaccines. Both vaccines have high efficacy, robust data and trialing behind them, limited risk of adverse reactions, and the adverse reactions are mostly insignificant. So let's take a second to talk about some of the statistics and interpretation of the results of the trials for both of those vaccines. You'll hear a lot of people talk about the efficacy of the vaccine. So what does efficacy mean? I would say the simplest way to think of that is how successful statistically is this vaccine, with the objective being making someone immune to COVID-19. So what you'll see is Pfizer says it has a 95.0% efficacy, while Moderna, I believe, is 94.1%. Then you will see after that 95% CI, which stands for confidence interval, and past that, two more percentages. And what those percentages are what's called upper and lower limit. And what that means is if you have a 95% confidence interval with, let's say, lower limit of 90% and upper limit of 95%, that means that if you were to grab a random sample out of an entire population of people and you keep doing that, you can say with 95% confidence that the average of whatever you're measuring is going to fall between 90 to 95%. And so how you apply that and understand the data and looking at the Moderna and Pfizer vaccine is you'll see an efficacy and a confidence interval and then an upper and lower limit. It's quite simple to look at it as this. It doesn't mean that with Pfizer, which has 95% efficacy, that you're only going to be 95% immune to COVID-19. That's not what it means. It means that if you were to pull a sample group from the entire population of people that have received the vaccine, there is a 95% confidence that the amount of people or percentage of people that are immune within that sample are going to fall between the upper and lower limits. And for Pfizer, it's somewhere around 90 to 97%. I don't know the numbers offhand, and it's a hair lower for Moderna. It's like 89 to 96. So between the two, the efficacies is about the same, and the trial groups are a little bit different. Moderna had about 30,000 people in the trial group, while Pfizer had, I think, 36,000. And both are very well supported with data and have robust data behind them. Both vaccines are a 2-shot series. Pfizer, you get one shot and you have to get another shot 3 weeks later. Moderna, you have to get one shot and get another shot 4 weeks later. And I personally received the Moderna vaccine, and I'm currently waiting on the second shot of the series. The testing and efficacy for both these shots is after the second shot. So getting one shot right now, per the data and what we've trialed, we don't know is enough to be appropriately protected against COVID. All right, so now for the fun stuff, let's talk about the myths. Myth number 1, this is a rushed vaccine. Now let's talk about rushed versus quick. This was a quick vaccine, not a rushed vaccine. Rushed implies that there were corners that were cut and that there were thresholds that were not met, and that there was quality that was sacrificed along the way. There are a series of limiting factors whenever trying to get a new drug on the market. Some of the three big ones are A, obviously priority, 2, money, and 3, trial participants. This vaccine and these vaccines hold such an incredible priority for the obvious reason that this is a global pandemic right now. So there's an incredible amount of priority put into these vaccines. And two, you want to talk about money. There's been a ton of, with the priority, there's been a ton of funds funneled in that direction so that we can create a vaccine as soon as possible. And then three, trial participants. With priority, you're also going to have a ton of voluntary participants. So we've had, like I said, there was about 30,000 participants in the Moderna trial vaccine and 36,000 within the Pfizer vaccine. So by no means was this a rushed vaccine. This was a quick vaccine, but not a rushed vaccine. The analogy I like to use for this is if you were trying to buy a new car, but you have a perfectly fine running car right now and you just want the next model, a faster, prettier, cooler car, it's going to be some time before you buy that car. You're going to do the research. You're going to take the time. There is no rush behind it. There's no priority. You're still got four wheels that you can get to and from work and to the grocery store and where you need to go. Now, if you had a car that completely busted, broke down, and got totaled, you probably have a new car within a couple weeks, just out of pure necessity. It doesn't mean that you bought an unsafe car or didn't do your research appropriately. You just prioritize that research and prioritize funds to where they need to go out of pure necessity and priority. Myth number 2, COVID has a 99.8% survival rate, so it is not worth it to get the vaccine. This is frankly just wrong. The numbers don't add up at all. There's been a 3 to 5% case fatality rate for just about the duration of the pandemic. So you can't have both those numbers that work out. You can't have 3 to 5% of people dying from this disease and then also 99.8% of them surviving. And let's say, for argument's sake, that there is a 3% fatality rate. That also doesn't mean that this has a 97% survival rate. Survival is not the inverse of death or mortality. And the reason being is there's a ton of people that are still very sick from the disease. So there's a ton of people in population that are actively sick from this disease. And for that reason, you can't just say everyone that hasn't died has survived, because it's not true. And another big thing to point out is survival rate is not a metric or term that's been used by anybody specifically within the field in regards to analyzing data associated with this disease or any disease. And the reason being is survival is a very loose term. There's a ton of people that are COVID resolved, but are still in the ICU sick as shit and dying from secondary conditions from the initial insult of COVID. Then there's a ton of people who have survived or had minor bouts of COVID and are having secondary and tertiary complications down the road later. One thing we do know is COVID-19 causes increased coagulopathy for about 90 days. And what that means is you, for 90 days, have a higher chance of clotting and creating clots in your body. Clots in the wrong place in your body are not good. They cause deep vein thrombosis, they cause pulmonary embolism, stroke, and heart attack. So we're seeing people who are 20 years old, 30 years old, young, with no comorbidities other than the fact that they had COVID, 30, 60 days down the line, have a stroke. And then specifically with our pediatric population, most pediatrics don't die of COVID acutely, but we're seeing what's called MIS-C, or multi-inflammatory syndrome, in children. And this is a very serious condition, but this used to be a condition we would almost never see. It's very rare. And now we're seeing this very commonly with a lot of pediatric patients who had COVID and resolved from it, and then a few weeks to a couple months down the line, come back with significant issues associated to MIS-C. So end of the day, no, the people that didn't die of COVID didn't survive necessarily. They're not inversely proportionate. And even if they were, that's still 3 to 5%. That's not 99.8% survival. So this is just wrong misinformation, quite frankly. Myth number 3, mRNA has never been used before and changes your DNA. This is kind of an easy one to dispel because it's just wrong. mRNA-based interventions have been studied for over a decade, I believe, at this point. And they're actually utilized and FDA approved for some cancer interventions. So mRNA being used as a medical intervention is not new. And it also does not change your DNA. There's just nothing right about that. mRNA never enters the nucleus where DNA even sits. So now that we've talked about and dispelled some of the myths, let's talk about how the vaccines work. The active ingredient that causes immunity to COVID-19 within the vaccines is this stuff called mRNA, or messenger ribonucleic acid. To simplify it, it kind of works like this. It is just a blueprint on how to create a protein structure. And what's being created is the spike protein, which is a component of COVID-19. So mRNA is absorbed into the cells, and then once in the cells produces a spike protein, your immune system then learns these spike proteins are bad. Now, the spike protein alone does not get you sick and cannot get you sick. It's just a component of COVID. So your body learns that whenever it sees these spike proteins, to react quick and aggressively to knock them out. And that's how you gain immunity. And why it's important to get a shot versus just getting sick with COVID is when you get sick with COVID, then comes all the chances of the acuity of the disease in which you can get very sick. And if you don't get sick, then there's all the secondary complications associated that we already just talked about. When you get a vaccine, it's kind of like this. You can either have a bad guy enter a room full of a lot of people with a knife, stab a bunch of them, and then people see, oh, every time I see this guy, we now know it's bad. He's bad and we shouldn't allow him in, right? But you just then had to have a bunch of people stabbed and die because of this one man. Versus if we know he's bad and we put up a don't let this man in poster. So every time we now recognize what his face looks, the second he comes to the door, we shut the door. That's what the vaccine is doing and the objective of the vaccine. So once you dispel all the misinformation associated with COVID-19 and the vaccines, the only real sound argument that still lies there after the fact is the risk of long-term effects. Now, that doesn't mean that there are long-term effects. It just means that there's a potential for them because we haven't had this specific vaccine for long enough to study the long-term effects. The flip side to that is the same argument is held for COVID-19. We don't know the long-term effects of COVID-19. We're starting to see the short and midterm effects of COVID-19, and they're pretty significant. So ultimately, you have a balanced argument. There's risk and potential of long-term effects on both sides. So ultimately, the choice comes down to, do you want to be active or passive? Do you want to be active in taking a step forward by taking the vaccine, taking a leap forward in hopefully overcoming this disease, ideally protecting yourself and your friends and family, and possibly moving on from this? Or do you want to be passive, avoid the potential of long-term risks with the vaccine, but sustain the disease, open up the chance that you may get the disease and become possibly very sick from it or its secondary and tertiary complications, while continuing to allow this disease to sustain and thrive within our population? Once again, still having the risk of long-term effects from getting the disease. So ultimately, I chose to be active. I chose choice. I chose to trust in science. I chose to trust in the data, and I chose the best suggestion of all the experts within their respective field. And one thing that did make me feel very comfortable was looking around and seeing all the people that are much, much smarter than me. Doctors, nurses, NPs, PAs, everything in between that jumped on getting the vaccine as soon as they could. They trust in the data, they did their own research, and they're just smart as hell. And that was their choice. That gave me a lot of comfort. Ultimately, though, this choice is completely voluntary. Nobody is making you get this vaccine. I know there's a lot of people out there that are very passionate and vocal about how bad this vaccine is and how dangerous it is and how unsafe it is and how there's ulterior motives and nefarious motives behind it. What's important is that you know where to listen and get your information from. So please, please, please listen to the experts within their respective fields. Read the data yourself. It's out there. It is not hidden. It's on CDC's, FDA, Moderna, Pfizer, all of the above. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to answer what I can, and what I can't answer, I can direct you in the right place to listen or research yourself, or talk to somebody who is, once again, smarter than myself and more experienced, or it is their specific field of expertise, which this is not mine. I'm a paramedic. I'm not a virologist, immunologist, but I am well-versed within medicine enough and within statistics to be able to understand this, to relay information to you. So please feel free to reach out to me on my Instagram. If you don't have Instagram, please feel free to email me at the following email, With that being said, thank you so much for listening. It really does mean a lot to me when people view my videos and interact with me and have questions and appreciate the content I put out. So thank you so much. And with that being said, friend, please stay healthy and well, and I'll see you in the next one.